Need your daily fix on mixed martial arts?
We're going to kind of recap Bellator 155
from UFC 198.
Who's who?
Kind of a controversial decision.
And who's not?
I couldn't figure out why, and then it hit me.
Well, don't you fret, because Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your daily dose of MMA podcasts. Everything from the UFC, Bellator Fighting Championships, Extreme Cage Fighting, Invicta Fighting Championships, and so much more. Join us as we talk about some of the biggest names in mixed martial arts. We've got you covered here on Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC MMA Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Arnel, and as usual, I hope you're doing well for yourself. You, your friends, your family, during this major time of negativity and uncertainty. I really do hope you're doing well for yourself. You're fine, you're healthy, you're safe. And just gonna put this out there right now, don't loot. Don't loot, and don't cause any trouble for anybody else that's unrelated to a problem that you have. So, don't destroy your local Vietnamese shop for no real true reason. Don't steal their flat screen TV for that poor Vietnamese family. Just gonna put this out there right now because things are getting kind of complicated right now in the States. And with complications happening right now, one fighter that's going through major complications with their contractual obligations and negotiations would be Jon Jones. And so, last podcast episode I was talking about Jon Jones and his issues right now with Dana White and the UFC, because he's pushing towards wanting to have a big mega fight money. He wants mega fight money for Francis Ngannou when he does go up to heavyweight. Now, we don't know what's going to happen with Jon Jones. We don't know if he's going to go to heavyweight. Actually, he's saying that he is going to vacate the UFC light heavyweight belt, and he might go somewhere else. That's the speculation right now. There's rumors. Ryan Bader has already thrown out his name out there, saying, you know what, he'll be welcoming for Jon Jones to participate at Bellator. And I can see, and consider that Ryan Bader is simultaneously both the light heavyweight and the heavyweight champion at Bellator, I wouldn't be surprised if Bellator were to push this mega super fight between Jon Jones and Ryan Bader. That would be a really fun fight, and I can see Jon Jones being really accepting of that. But the money, that's the biggest issue here. Does Bellator have enough money to go give to Jon Jones? Does one championship have enough money to go give to Jon Jones? UFC, they definitely have the money. So what's going on here? Will Jon Jones leave the UFC? Will he be officially vacating the title? Will we see him fight at the heavyweight division? Are we going to see him fight Francis Ngannou? Well, this is coming in from BloodyElbow.com, titled UFC Finances. How much money does Jon Jones make fighting for the UFC? And how much is this compared to what Jon Jones brings in? Over the last few days, a spat between the UFC's president Dana White and the promotion's light heavyweight champion Jon Jones has played out in the public eye. According to Jon Jones, he had made what he thought was the understandable request for a new higher purse in return for going up weight to fight Francis Ngannou. This was said to be rejected outright by the UFC, with the discussion never even getting around to money. White's response was to claim that Jon Jones had asked for an obscene amount of money, one that was in the neighborhood of what Deontay Wilder received to fight Tyson Fury, which was $30 million guaranteed, according to some reports. Jon Jones has blasted this as a lie and followed up by saying he would have been more happy he would have been happy just to get even half of that. So Jon Jones says he would be happy to get $15 million in his contract fight if he were to go to Francis Ngannou at heavyweight. He has since asked for his release and announced that he is relinquishing his UFC title. Jon Jones also has tweeted out that Dana White is a liar, while Dana White has said that he's got a rebuttal for this and that he has text messages showing what Jon Jones wants in terms of his fight purse. Much of the debate with both Daniel Cormier and Chael Sonnen have weighed in on, as boiled down to how much Jon Jones asked for and if it was too much. So the big question is, what should Jon Jones be paid? I say Jon Jones should be paid. He should be, without a doubt, top 3 most highest paid athletes in the UFC. He should be. It'd have to be Conor McGregor, number 1, just because of how remarkable he is. And then number 2 would either have to be Khabib Nurmagomedov. It'd have to be either Khabib, Daniel Cormier, Amanda Nunes, Jon Jones. Those fighters should be the highest paid fighters in the UFC. And Amanda Nunes doesn't even scratch $1 million per fight. That's how bad it is for her pay. But what about John Jones? I see John Jones should be paid higher than Khabib. Although his big fight was against Conor. Conor being the big name kind of makes Khabib automatically a bigger name also. Look at Nate Diaz, for instance. So let's look at marginal revenue product. When trying to determine a fighter's worth, it's almost helpful to know what is their marginal revenue product, their MRP. MRP is the additional revenue created from the addition of 1 unit of input. A very simple example is someone is hosting a concert festival in which they sell 10,000 tickets at $50 a piece. Sorry for the math, by the way, if you guys don't like math. I don't like math, but I find this very interesting. But then they book a classic rock band that leads to an additional 5,000 tickets sold. Remember, so it was $10,000 sold, 10,000 tickets sold, $50 a piece, and then an extra band comes in, which brings up an extra $5,000. So a 33% increase in terms of economics and tickets sold. That brand's MRP would be $250,000, $50 times 5,000. And if the promoter then booked a pop singer that led an additional 20,000 tickets being sold, that person's MRP would be $1 million because it's $50 times the 20,000, which was the tickets sold. In theory, it was the addition of those musical acts that led to the extra sales. They should receive the majority of their MRP. They should receive the majority of their MRP. The same should hold true for fighters. The more revenue they add to the UFC's revenues, the more money they should get paid. Last year, Paul Gibb Publishing moving to the needle of MMA on the marginal revenue product of UFC fighters, a paper that looked at UFC fighters' MRP. He found that the vast majority of revenues were produced by a very small number of fighters, and the compensation for these top fighters received was but a fraction of what they added to the company's bottom line. According to GIF, out of the 509 fighters that had appeared on the pay-per-view main card between January 1, 2006 and March 3, 2018, the top 44 fighters had earned an average of just 8.5% of their MRP. Think about that. The top 44 in the past 12 years, which includes fighters like Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, John Jones, Ronda Rousey, Conor McGregor, peak Anderson Silva, only got 8.5%. He also said that a very small number of fighters in a very few fights generated a large amount of additional residential pay-per-view revenue. Approximately 5% of all fighter bouts added $5 million or more in residential pay-per-view, and 1.5% added $10 million or more to the event's revenue. This means that during the time period looked at by Gift, approximately 4 fighter bouts a year during a typical 13 pay-per-view year would add at least $10 million in residential pay-per-view. Now, what's the MRP of John Jones? A simple way to make a rough estimate of John Jones' MRP would to take the lowest gate figure and the lowest pay-per-view revenues for an event in a particular year. This would represent the UFC's variable revenue floor, and then deduct those amounts from any other event's gates and pay-per-view revenue. The difference would, in theory, be the MRP for all fighters on that event, since John Jones was the primary attraction for these events. It stands to reason that the majority of this additional revenue could be attributed to him. Based on residential pay-per-view sales and gates, I've estimated that 8 pay-per-view events headlined by John Jones from 2012 to 2017, the 8 pay-per-view events, did almost $108 million in revenue above the UFC's floor. That's an average of approximately $14 million in additional revenue per event headlined by John Jones. 2 events in particular did well above the UFC's floor. These were John Jones' 2 matches with Daniel Cormier. UFC 182 generated $23.8 million more million than the UFC floor of UFC 214, generated $27 million above. Now, obviously, we can't ascribe all this additional revenue to John Jones, but if we say that his presence is responsible for just 50% of that additional revenue, then John Jones' MRP would have averaged $7 million from 2012 to 2015. And his other 2 Cormier fights, UFC 182 and UFC 214, his MRP would have been $11.9 million, $12 million, and $13.9 million respectively. So, does John Jones make his MRP? It's proven that John Jones is in fact the moneymaker. But Dana White has gone to say that John Jones isn't worth that much because the revenue he brings in isn't all that big. So, the stats say something otherwise. Now, obviously, we can't ascribe everything. The article going to say that you can't just say, oh, because John Jones was the main event, that doesn't mean he was the main draw. Kind of have to argue against that, really. But still, if you're responsible for 50% of the draw, you'd be making $7 million a year, or no, $7 million per fight. So far, it turns out John Jones kind of is worth the money. Now, the article is going to go on more about his fight purse in comparison to other fight purses. I've gone to say that most fighters in the UFC, unless you're a top-tier fighter, a long-tenured top-tier fighter, then you'll definitely make some money. Though, Amanda Nunes, she barely scratches $1 million per year, even though she's the GOAT of the women's division. John Jones, let's find out after the short break here. You're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
And we're back. So, does John Jones make his MRP? For today's podcast here, I'll be discussing a lot as it pertains to economics of fighters, because right now, John Jones' salary and his fight purse, John Jones is the greatest of all time in the light heavyweight division. No doubt about that. Now, does he deserve the money? Well, that's a question. And also, in other podcast episodes, I've gone extensively about how fighters are constantly complaining about their fight purses all the time. Well, is John Jones kind of right here? So the question is, how much does John Jones make? Now, the exact estimation or exact figure and the unsealed exhibits in the antitrust cases have been careful not to release too much individual fighter information. Every time I mention fighter purses, or whenever a fighter's purse is thrown out there, it's because we can make a general estimation, and also there's some information being out there towards some news sources where we can get an estimated guess of what type of money they're making. For instance, it is estimated that Michelle Waterson made about $60,000 for her fight purse when she fought against Carla Esparza. That's just an estimation. We don't know what the exact number is, but that's the probable money that she probably made. But what has been revealed does allow us to estimate what the maximum amounts he could have earned fighting from 2012 to 2017. In a document titled Project Basque, the UFC broke down what share of revenue the top 20 highest paid fighters made in 2012 and 2015. 2012 to 2015. I examined this document in a previous post. Fighter compensation. Top fighter comp continues to grow each year, with revenue breakdown across top fighters has remained relatively consistent since 2012-2014 was the outlier year. And so the numbers right now I'm going to be mentioning are in the millions. And so the top fighter, now I guess when this document goes about the top fighter, it's the highest paid fighter for the organization. So in 2012, the annual compensation for the top fighter was estimated to be around $4.8 million. 2013, $8.2 million. 2014, $1.8 million. And then went back up to $8 million again. Which is very strange to me, because I would think, as a result of inflation that happens, even though from 2012 to 2020, I can make an estimated guess that money payouts should be a lot more higher compared to that of what was happening 8 years ago, specifically for John Jones. So, yes, it has doubled. Good thing. Top fighter payout, $4.8 million, now to $8.5 million in a 3-year span. I can make the estimated guess that it should be around $10 million in terms of the average annual pay for a UFC fight, for the top fighter for the UFC. Fighters 2 through 5, so these are the top 5 rank. These are the 2, 3, 4, 5 highest paid fighters. So they make a total annual compensation of about $12 million. So 2, 3, 4, 5, so 4, and then you divide by 3. So the fighters here make about $3 million. The average second, third, fourth, fifth best fighter makes about an average $3 million in 2012, and now it went up towards it went up towards I think $4 million. Yeah, I'm looking at it now. It went up like $4.5 million per fight. So the top fighter in who are 2, 3, 4, 5, dating back to 2015, make about the same amount of money as the number one fighter in 2012. Very interesting. And then we look at the top 20 fighters generally. So the top 20 fighters, their annual, when combined together, salary back at 2012 was a totaling at $30 million. In total, you get the top 20 fighters all together, it's about $30 million. And then in 2015, it's about $47 million for the top 20 fighters. And this is where complications arise as it pertains towards fighter purses. And I understand why a lot of fighters, a lot of mixed martial arts fighters, are upset as it pertains to their money. Yes, they are making more money. But it's, once again, it's bananas compared towards other sports. When you got players making, here, the top 20 players, the top 20 athletes in the UFC, in total, make an estimated $47 million per year. Guess what? NBA teams, their costs of just being together, of like a 15-man roster, there's chances that 3 of them together make about $80 million. There is. So I remember with the Miami Heats, with the big 3, and that was dating back to 2013, there were 3 players all being paid roughly $25 million per. So if you think about that, it was $75 million. 3 players in the NBA, 3 of the top players, 3 of the top 20 players of the NBA, one of them being number 1, another one being top 10, another one being top 20, they made about $75 million. And that's not including money, that's their base pay, not including, winning games and also advertising and sponsorship deals. 3 players, 2013, $75 million. 2013, UFC, $48 million for 20 fighters. 20 fighters. Even now, there are players and athletes that are in the lower tier end of the spectrum, or lower mid-tier end of the spectrum, in the National Basketball Association, who make about $15, $12 million. And what I mean, like, there's one athlete can go make $15, $12 million. 20 of the top athletes in 2015 together made $47 million. And once you go here, top 20 highest paid UFC fighters, the top fighter in 2015 made an estimated $8.5 million. The top athlete. You know that the top athlete is making the NBA? $30 million. No, they don't even have to be a top athlete. All they do is make a top 20. If you are a top 20 athlete in the NBA, you can make $30 million. That doesn't include advertising or extra bonuses in your contract or sponsorships. $30 million. And all you have to do is perform for about 6 to 8 months in the year. And it's guaranteed pay. So obviously there's a huge pay disparity. And even though the NBA has a whole lot of money, this also applies towards a lot for the MLB, especially the MLB, and the NFL. Now then, the top 20 highest paid UFC fighters average annual compensation, $8.5 million. It's just weird knowing that a bench player in the National Basketball Association can make about $15 million, $20 million, sitting in the bench, while the number 1 guy, which would be like Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, John Jones, can make just under $10 million. And I know for a lot of fighters, here's the thing what people have to recognize as it pertains towards money, because money is as big relative to the organization, which means for someone like pro wrestling, like WWE. I know WWE isn't considered an actual sport. It's fake. It's theatrical. But here's how the perception of money works as it pertains towards your purses in the WWE. If you're making $2 million a year, you're big time. You are the top 5 highest paid guy, person in the WWE. You are big time. You are swimming in money, making $2 million. Because most of the wrestlers make about $500K a year. And when it comes to contractual negotiations and wrestlers who have to talk, because even wrestlers, they have to go through contracts and they have to argue with their owners, with owners and business people and people of HR, their bosses, and agents as it pertains to how much money they're making wrestling for the WWE. You're swimming in money if you're making $2 million, $5 million. I think Undertaker makes about $5 million. And he's one of the richest guys in all of WWE history. So that's what's considered big time, making $5 million, $2 million in the WWE. It's considered big time in the UFC to make about $8 million a year. But that $8 million is considered small time when applied towards other organizations. When there's the MLB and the NHL and the NFL that are paying like $30 million per year for some athletes. For not even like the top athlete, for just a lot of their athletes. So, the money is relative. In the world of sports, UFC is low tier in terms of how much money you're making in your purse. But within that pond of just mixed martial arts, $8 million to $2 million is a lot. In the grand scheme of sports, small time. So in that same project from the document, the UFC estimated that the highest paid fighter would earn $15 million in total for 2016. That's if they were to compete 2 times a year. If they were to fight 2 times a year, they'd be making $15 million. It's just an upper limit for what Jon Jones could have made that year, with that projection having been made. Because here's the thing with Jon Jones. Jon Jones does 1 fight per year. There was 1 year during his run as champion to which he fought twice, and he made $8 million. So we can accept the fact that Jon Jones could have potentially made twice as much money if he was fighting twice a year instead of once a year, because right now he wants to be paid the equivalent of 2 fights instead of 1 if he were to be matched up with Francis Ngannou at the heavyweight division. From Dana White's standpoint and from the execs from UFC, it does make some sense. You're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast. Come back after the short break.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And we are back. So today's podcast is mostly centered around fight purses. Because right now, at the head of things, the greatest of all time in Jon Jones, he's going through a contractual dispute as it pertains to money. And so, so for this podcast here, I'm going to go dive deep into the economics as it pertains to fighters here. And there's a document that was brought up that showcased how much Jon Jones and how much the rest of the UFC fighters are making. The top 20 UFC fighters have been making since 2012 to 2015. And now we got here. This is the I got this document here that shows this is the absolute maximum amount Jon Jones could have possibly earned per year. So, this isn't the estimated. The numbers are probably lower than they actually are. But here, in 2012, he fought against Rashad Evans and Vitor Belfort. Those 2 fights gave him $5 million. 2013, he fought against Chael Sonnen and Alexander Gustafsson at $8.2 million. 2014, he fought against Glover Teixeira, $1.8 million. Wasn't really much. He was also going through a lot of problems this time. 2015 versus Daniel Cormier, he made $7 million. 2016 versus OSP, Ovince St. Preux, $5 million. Daniel Cormier back in 2017, another $5 million there. So this is the maximum possibly earned by Jon Jones, with a total likely several millions of dollars lower than this. But even inflated, it is still a fraction of the additional revenue his events generate to the UFC, with $32 million versus $108 million. So if the UFC had a lot more money, if the UFC had much more money, he should be paid $108 million instead of the $32 million he's getting. And that's the maximum, counting off millions. So here's the actual truth about it. Here's the truth. So 2012, I said $5 million. Truth is, it's about $2.5 million. 2013, it was estimated at maximum, he should have made $8.2 million. And instead, he made out probably $5 million. 2014, he didn't even make $1 million. I could say that. 2015, it possibly is around $3.5 million. 2016, about $3.5 million. 2017, about maybe $3.5 million or $4 million also. So, he's not making all that much money. Once again, when I say he's not making a lot of money, I'm talking about relative towards other sporting organizations. In the world of mixed martial arts, he's making bank. He's making a whole lot of money. He's making more money than any other fighter, with the exception of like Conor McGregor or Ronda Rousey, in the organization. Alright, we can all accept that. But even then, relative to other sports, considering that he is an athlete and he's a major name in the world of sports here, not that good. He should be making $108 million. He should be making $108 million. Instead, he's like possibly making $32 million. As for his 2 Daniel Cormier fights, the difference is even more stark. a potential maximum $12 million in bout pay versus $50.8 million. He was supposed to make about $50.8 million in these two fights. And that's if the UFC had the money. But they don't. So he got $12 million with both fights. Jon Jones' total pay from 2012-2017, maximum of $32 million, and likely several millions less. I say he made about $16 million. About half of that. I say half of that. So, Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. So, what then should Jon Jones make for a fight between Francis and Ngannou? Once again, we're talking about what he should be making versus what he will probably be making relative towards how much money UFC is willing to pay him based on the averages of recent years. Well, if we are basing pay on MRP, it would depend on how much additional revenue was generated by that fight over a generic replacement. Thanks to the contracted guaranteed revenues, the UFC now receives for every bout. Their floor is much higher than it was a few years ago. The UFC sponsorship and international television deals bring in just about $7 million to pay-per-view events. Their ESPN broadcast deal pays them a couple of $1 million to air the prelims. And finally, their pay-per-view deal with ESPN Plus guarantees them a minimum floor of residential pay-per-view revenue. This is thought to be the neighborhood of $15 million per event. Even without commercial pay-per-view or live event revenues, the UFC is guaranteed well over $20 million for a pay-per-view event, regardless of the headliner. Now, obviously, the fighters still matter, as eventually fans would probably grow tired of watching UFC events if they were headlined by random fighters pulled off by the streets. There's an argument to be made that these large contractual deals are the result of the collective MRP of all the UFC fighters, but even true, that doesn't help an individual make the case that they are adding any additional value to an event. I remember UFC London, that entire fight was scrapped, and the UFC was, here's the thing, reading this now, when UFC London was scrapped, there was rumors out there, and Dana White was going out there trying to find random jobber nobodies to go compete at UFC London. Whether it was Ngannou and Rosenstrike fighting at UFC London, even if like Michael Bisping were to come out of retirement, and he were to have like this amazing, like, and also GSP were to come out of retirement, and they headline UFC London, the UFC would be making about the same amount of money just off the basis that they got guaranteed deals. So really, at this point, it doesn't really matter how much star power a certain fighter might have in 2020, just because there are guaranteed deals. There's guaranteed floor prices for UFC pay-per-view events to which they're going to be paid, whether or not that fighter is a big-time fighter or a guy who should be fighting the lower card. It's good for the UFC. They get guaranteed money, but this doesn't help the case for their fighters. The question for Jon Jones and Ngannou is how much do either of them add to the UFC pay-per-view? If we assume that it will just sell a similar amount of pay-per-views as UFC 245, which is headlined by Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington, which is reported as being 300,000 buys on ESPN+, we're looking as little as $3.5 million in additional pay-per-view revenue once Canada and Australia was included. If the expectation is that it would look more like UFC 249, which is reported as having sold over 700,000 pay-per-views on ESPN+, then we could argue that Jon Jones added at least $21 million bonus towards the additional pay-per-view revenue. In another scenario, it's very possible that the heavyweight super fight draws better the numbers than Gaethje vs. Ferguson. It could happen. I could see Jon Jones and Ngannou being a much more bigger, popular fight than either of those two fighters here. If it draws around $850,000 buys, the same estimate as the comparison they brought up in Fury vs. Wilder, then we could be looking at an additional $27 million in pay-per-view money. If Jon Jones vs. Ngannou ended up being a blockbuster like the reported 1.1 million buys for the UFC 246 at McGregor vs. Cerrone, I don't think so. I don't think Jon Jones vs. Ngannou is in the same level as Donald Cerrone vs. McGregor, but if it were, it would be Jon Jones' MRP would be worth about an additional $37 million. Perhaps the fairest agreement between all the parties then would be the UFC to guarantee Jon Jones and Ngannou only their show purses, but then give them any additional pay-per-view revenue the fight generates. In theory, this money was only being produced by their presence, but such an agreement seems incredibly unlikely. As he wrote, consistent with prior research, evidence suggests the UFC extracts the most surplus from its most productive fighters. For what it's worth, Jon Jones reveals that his current deal now just earns him $5 per fight. So he gets about $5 million per fight, and relative towards everything else, it's not on the ball. So how much should Jon Jones make? I say right now that Jon Jones should definitely make what he should make versus what he would probably make, John Jones, if he were to participate in a fight against Francis Ngannou moving up, I can see John Jones make the argument that he wants to go towards $10 million because he's placing himself at a much more greater risk, fighting against these bigger dudes, and giving up his light heavyweight belt. But he's already given up his light heavyweight belt, so he's not really going to lose anything except for his record. Because the truth is, John Jones really is undefeated. That one fight he lost via disqualification doesn't really count. Okay, John Jones really is undefeated, and he's risking his legacy. He's putting his legacy on the line, competing at the heavyweight division. Much more dangerous fighters here. So I say right now, he should be making, I say, $10 million at the most. $10 million at the most is what I think he is worth right now to the UFC. That's fair enough for the UFC to be able to pay him. That's how I put it. There are reports out there saying that he wants Deontay Wilder money. Truth is, if John Jones really wants to maximize as much money as he can, he has to go towards boxing. He has to go do boxing, or he has to, instead of $10 million, he can go ask for $7-8 million. He'll ask for $7 or $8 million, and then he can do extra things. Like here's the thing: Tyron Woodley made about $200,000. Tyron Woodley only made former welterweight champion. At one point, you could have argued the best welterweights in the entire world. All right. Tyron Woodley only made about $200K in his most recent fight against Gilbert Burns. $200,000. And so when you hear Dana White saying, "Oh man, dude, John Jones, man, he's swimming in money." Yes, he's swimming in money relative to other fighters, but the grand scheme of things, not really compared to other athletes. I hope John Jones and the UFC can come to an agreement because I'll love to see John Jones compete at the heavyweight division. You're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back right after a short break here.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the podcast. And so John Jones, other than the fact that he's going through issues concerning his contractual obligations, his money, he's also last seen in New Mexico. Last podcast I was talking about it on that John Jones had an altercation with two teenagers who had spray tags because they were vandalizing property, which you really shouldn't do. You really shouldn't be doing that. Currently right now in the States, things are getting very complicated. Things are getting very dark, negative, violent, hostile. And there are right now fighters who are going out there using their platform in order to give their own viewpoint or their opinion on the whole George Floyd incident. And so Chuck Liddell was seen in Huntington Beach, to which he came in. His house is being remodeled. His house is being remodeled in Santa Barbara. So he went over to Huntington Beach, and he's talking down like a gigantic group of protesters. One of them, I think, was trying to intimidate Chuck Liddell, but Chuck Liddell just grappled onto their hands. And then after that, things became settled. Chuck Liddell handled it pretty well during the protest, but there are other fighters and athletes participating in the protest as well. One most notably is Karl Anthony Towns. He's a player for the Minnesota Timberwolves. He was seen participating in the protest. And a guy here, Israel Adesanya, if you guys aren't following Israel Adesanya's Twitter, he posted a video of himself doing a speech during a Black Lives Matter protest that was happening in New Zealand. So this is being reported in by the Hindustan Times with the title of "Why? Because I'm Black, UFC champion Israel Adesanya shares his own experience of racism." The 30-year-old Nigerian-born Adesanya, who has lived in New Zealand since he was 10, addressed a crowd of almost 4,000 people at a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest Monday in downtown Auckland, New Zealand, which is New Zealand's largest city. UFC middleweight champion Israel Adesanya has joined a growing group of prominent sports stars condemning the killing of George Floyd in the United States last week. The 30-year-old Nigerian-born Adesanya, who has lived in New Zealand since he was 10, addressed a crowd of almost 4,000 people at a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest Monday in downtown Auckland, which is New Zealand's largest city. Similar rallies took place in other New Zealand cities, including a torchlight vigil and pouring rain outside a parliament in the capital, Wellington. Adesanya spoke on his own experiences of racism and his anger at racial profiling. This is his quote: "How many of you walk into the store and have to put your hands behind your back just to say just so they don't think you're stealing? How many of you walk down the street and have to kind of smile and try to make that person who you can see is already scared of you, make them feel comfortable?" Adesanya said it happened in the building where he lives. "I just moved apartments and I'm on the top floor and I have to go in the elevator. 3 times already I've had to have racist, scared white people jump when they see me and I smile at them," he said. "So now I've got to stay to the side and let them walk through just so they don't get scared when they see me. Because, why? Because I'm black." Adesanya was emotional as he made a call for peaceful action to register anger at Floyd's death. "After this, we're going to march," he said. "But we've been talking for so long. We've been marching for so long. But it's not about us now. We need you to speak up. We need to say something. We need to say something because I'm sick and tired of seeing those faces get killed. Because guess what? I see myself in them the whole time, and it's heartbreaking." Thousands of people in the United States and around the world have taken to the streets to express outrage over Floyd's May 25 death and other killings of black people, particularly by the police. George Floyd, who was handcuffed and said he couldn't breathe, died after a white Minneapolis police officer pressed a knee on his neck. This case is now being ruled as a homicide. Another fighter that went to the streets amidst the protests and rioting that's going on as a result of the death of George Floyd was UFC Hall of Famer Chuck Liddell, who took the streets of Huntington Beach this week to talk to business owners who have been trying to protect their businesses against rioters, as well as talk to protesters. While out there, he ended up de-escalating several physical conflicts. This is being quoted in by Chuck Liddell. "It's good to see people defending their city," Liddell told ABC7/the MMA Weekly. "It's terrible. Violence begets violence. Violence doesn't help anybody. We all know what happened was wrong. Everybody I know thinks it was wrong. It's hard to watch," said Liddell. "But destroying cities, destroying people, hurting people does not do any good for anybody. Hey, protest all you want, do it peacefully." Liddell also told TMZ that while everyone has a right to their opinion and to peacefully protest, nobody has a right to cause violence or steal. He also clarifies that he was not against the protesters and he just tried to prevent people from getting hurt. "I'm happy for Chuck Liddell and Israel Adesanya for putting their voice out there and doing their part to help the community. One specific fighter that I know a lot of people dog on, John Jones, coming back to him, he's got a lot of controversy happening with him. He's considered a bad role model. Some consider him a good role model. Some consider him a really selfish, greedy person. Well, this is being reported in by Insider.com. The morning after he took this to the streets to fight crime, one of the UFC's top champions returned to help rebuild local businesses, which has been looted. John Jones went to Albuquerque on Sunday to make vandals surrender cans of spray paint. He posted a footage of the incident on his Instagram account and asked if this blank is even about George Floyd anymore. Floyd, a black man, died on May 25 after a Minneapolis police officer knelt him on his neck, which sparked daily protests across the U.S. and internationally. John Jones goes on to say on his Instagram, "Why the F are you punk teenagers destroying our cities? As a young black man, I'm frustrated, but this is not the way," Jones said. "We are starting to make a bad situation worse." The morning after, he assembled a group of friends, drove back into the Albuquerque streets, and helped sweep smashed glass and board up broken windows. "It's time to put in some work," Jones said in a new video on Monday. "Got a nice little crew of guys, volunteers who's gonna get ready, do some work, let's get it, see if we can find something to clear up. If you guys need help with your small businesses, we're here, and we'll be here all day." John has gathered a team together to help clean up the streets of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and rebuild local businesses. So right now, if you look at his Instagram, you see him actually doing construction work and repairing stuff and cleaning up the city, which is really nice and good of him. He goes to say, "Lots of work to do on the streets today, man. If you're a real one, call your boys and get to work." Jones seemed to finish his day by speaking with law enforcement officials. He posted a photo on Twitter and spoke to his locals' pride. "The night is still young, but as of now, the looting is almost non-existent," he said. "The peaceful protest was beautiful." John Jones proceeds to tweet, and he says, "So proud of the city of Albuquerque tonight. The night is still young, but as of now, the looting is almost non-existent. The peaceful protest was beautiful." I'm really happy what John Jones is doing. I really do. Considering the fact that he has a history of being known as a pretty bad person, running over people, DUIs, holding illegal firearms. He's got a history of being considered a bad person. And so I'm happy seeing John Jones go out there. I can tell that he's really trying to make the concerted effort, into both A, shaping off his image, and also B, considering the fact that the topic right now of Black Lives Matter, the George Floyd incident, the coronavirus, everything that's going on right now currently in America, I respect John Jones for taking precedent and for doing something about it. Currently right now there are a lot of people who are talking about it via, if I go to my Twitter or Instagram or my Facebook, I see a lot of people talking about the incidents and spreading awareness. But there's a difference between spreading awareness and actually doing something about it. I respect peaceful protests. I respect awareness when you're physically going out there and doing something and talking to officials. Like, other than John Jones, I don't know any other sports athlete right now who's physically going to the local police department and be like, hey, let me talk to you. Let me provide you my insight, my perspective on the people here, on the people of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Let me give you my opinion of you guys. Let me give you let me tell you what's going on right now in the protests. I respect that. Because right now, I've talked about this in another episode of the podcast, and that it really is not right for violent protests to happen. There shouldn't be. Because what's the point of violent protests? Nothing. They don't really answer anything. All it does is makes you guys look worse. Israel Adesanya talked about it. Chuck Liddell has talked about it. John Liddell has talked about it. Being able to protest with violence and anger doesn't really serve anything, although it perfectly makes sense on why these three individuals are upset or angry, whether it be Chuck Liddell because he doesn't want to see his streets or businesses get destroyed, because Israel Adesanya because he's connected to the black community, John Jones because in Albuquerque, New Mexico, he sees people destroying businesses, and he's really connected to the problems going on right now in his local county and city. I respect these three people for doing something about it and are using their platforms in a positive way. Because, Israel Adesanya, Chuck Liddell, John Jones, currently right now, those three fighters are not looked at a positive light. Israel Adesanya is looked negatively, considering the fact that his last performance was really, really bad in the UFC. Chuck Liddell with his very bad performance against Tito Ortiz, John Jones, and his performance against Dominic Reyes. The three street fighters within the MMA community are not really placed in the most positive light. But now we're seeing these three people going out there, doing something, letting their voices be heard, and are actually being active. They're being active in helping their community, and I can respect that. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should do what Chuck Liddell, Israel Adesanya, and John Jones are doing, because although they can go through peaceful encounters with these protesters, there could be violent encounters, and I'm happy that these three fighters are able to go and do something positive for the community. So you're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back after the short break here.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And we are back. And so UFC 250 is right around the corner, coming up this Saturday, June 6th at 7 p.m. Pacific Time at the UFC Apex Facility Building in Las Vegas. Main event in the card, we got Felicia Spencer versus Amanda Nunes for the women's featherweight title. At the co-main event, we got Rafael Sunsao versus Cody Garbrandt, bantamweight Aljamain Sterling versus Corey Sandhagen, welterweight Neil Magny versus Anthony Rocco Martin, and at bantamweight, the first fight of the night will be Eddie Wineland versus Sean O'Malley. We got a lot of returning faces here. We got Neil Magny, Sean O'Malley, Cody Garbrandt. We've got three fighters here who are my personal favorites. And without a doubt, when I look at this card, I say either Rafael Sunsao versus Cody Garbrandt or Aljamain Sterling versus Corey Sandhagen. Either of those two could be a fight of the night contender. Really, I don't see Cody Garbrandt versus Rafael Sunsao going anywhere past the second round. I really don't. I think that will definitely be a war, and it might be the biggest eye-opener fight of the night. That is unless Felicia Spencer turns out probably the biggest fight ever win, the most biggest upset in UFC history other than Holly Holm knocking out Ronda Rousey. It would have to be if she could defeat Amanda Nunes at the main event. Wow. Just wow. In last week's podcast, I was talking about how Felicia Spencer, she's been improving. She's one of the best women's featherweight, even though the women's featherweight division is pretty dense in the sense that it's only about those two and then no one really else in the women's featherweight division, because that division was designed specifically to promote Chris Cyborg. And now that Cyborg is out, Amanda Nunes is his double world champion, but only one division actually matters, and that's the women's bantamweight title. What's going on with the women's featherweight division? And I say that it would be a good thing for the entire division if Felicia Spencer ends up being the champion, because the issue with all these fighters fight once or twice a year. You only fight once or twice a year, and then that's really about it, though. And so when you have a champion, this happened with Conor McGregor and Daniel Cormier when they were double world champions. Henry Cejudo, it was just impossible for one fighter to keep a division running when they're trying to run two different divisions simultaneously. It just doesn't really happen. Amanda Nunes is able to do it, unlike all the other guys, off the basis that there's no one else in the featherweight division who's really challenging her, with the exception being Felicia Spencer. So what's my prediction of this fight? Well, I've been wrong as it pertains to predicting the main event here. I've been wrong with the Tyron Woodley versus Gilbert Burns fight. I genuinely thought that a motivated Tyron Woodley can go defeat Gilbert Burns. He was motivated, but Gilbert Burns was just the better fighter that night. Also, the Jermaine Duraname versus Amanda Nunes fight, that to me was a red flag in that Nunes is definitely beatable. Even though she didn't lose that fight, though, it will really show that there were cracks in the hull of Amanda Nunes, and there are openings to which you can go defeat this woman who's considered the greatest of all time. So, Felicia Spencer versus Amanda Nunes, I gotta put my money down onto Amanda Nunes because she's a safe bet more than anything else. Amanda Nunes has a proven track record defeating former world champions compared to Felicia Spencer, who's, if you were to compare resumes of Nunes versus Felicia Spencer, it's complete night and day here. It really is. Spencer has had some solid victories in other promotions, but for the most part here, when she came to the UFC, she was pretty much used to be fed towards Chris Cyborg. But the Chris Cyborg performance is the reason why I am impressed with Felicia Spencer and why I think she's going to have a really good performance here against Amanda Nunes. I'm going to say right now, Felicia Spencer is going to have a better performance than Cyborg compared to Cyborg when she fought against Amanda Nunes. And the reason for that is because Felicia Spencer, upon losing to Chris Cyborg in her next fight, defeated her opponent via TKO, and it showed that Felicia Spencer's knockout ability and her ability to strike and her ability to go find angles and how very patient she is. She's developed a lot as a striker before the Cyborg fight and then afterwards. And I say Felicia Spencer is one of the more underrated boxers in all of the women's featherweight divisions, and in all of women's mixed martial arts, really. She's an incredibly underrated fighter. So when I see Amanda Nunes versus Felicia Spencer, Amanda Nunes, when she does box, her biggest issue is the fact that because she fought so wild against her opponent, this happened with Jermaine Duraname, and that she leaves herself open for counter shots, and then she just powers through. That's one thing why people love Amanda Nunes, is that she powers through, she puts herself that really is bad positions. She's putting herself in really bad positions, but she's willing to take the risk because she knows that she has the knockout power and the punching ability to go and find the right spots and knock out her opponent. She's been doing that for years. But Jermaine Duraname, she was the only woman that Amanda Nunes had struggled with because Nunes fights pretty much the same style. She's just so much more talented than her opponent that she can get away with fighting a wee bit reckless. Now compare that to someone like Felicia Spencer, who is a very safe, very passive fighter, fights incredibly smart, and I believe she has the formula to go and find the right angles and the right shots to go pick apart Amanda Nunes if these two were to have a long 5-round brawl. Even though Nunes is a champion, she's experienced as it pertains to fighting in the main event. When I look at Felicia Spencer, yes, although she doesn't have the experience that Amanda Nunes has as it pertains to these big fights, I think from just the eye test, when I look at the boxing and how clean it is that Felicia Spencer has compared to Amanda Nunes, I think Felicia Spencer can go keep a consistent pace through all 5 rounds. Now the issue though is that Amanda Nunes is a very aggressive style fighter, similar to that of Chris Cyborg, and I say Amanda Nunes is much more better than Chris Cyborg as it pertains to pushing towards these aggro 50-50 exchanges. I'm going to be honest with you right now, As it pertains to 50-50 exchanges, when both fighters are tightening up within the close range, no doubt about that, Amanda Nunes wins that fight. She wins in the clinching, she wins in the dirty boxing, and her boxing is so tight, and although it's not like Amanda Nunes, she's not the most prettiest fighter to look at in terms of her boxing and striking. It comes across as very reckless, but she's similar to Francis Ngannou, except with a whole lot of striking accuracy. In that, yeah, she's kind of meh as it pertains to fighting as it pertains to something like poking. Because Joanna Jacek, in my opinion, has to be the best poker in terms of jabs and fighting outside the pocket against her opponents. Amanda Nunes, she isn't all that strong as it pertains to the traditional boxing, jabbing, fighting outside the pocket. And when it comes to fighting in the middle of the pockets, she can go alright then. But when it comes to close range, 50-50 exchanges, where both women are swinging their arms, Felicia Spencer loses. Felicia loses that matchup there. Amanda Nunes will definitely knock out Felicia Spencer if Spencer doesn't play it safe. How I predict this fight, though, will be Amanda Nunes chasing Spencer, and if Spencer can survive the first minute and 15 seconds in of these 50-50 exchanges, and she can go throw in some quick counter punches, then the pace of the fight slows down. The pace of the fight slows down, and when you look at the Jermaine Raname versus Amanda Nunes fights, Amanda Nunes, she can fight that slowed down, very grapple heavy. You know, the championship style fighter. It's so strange to think about this. That in order for you fighters who fight very slow and passive, that's a championship style of fighting. But fighters who fight super recklessly, that's fighting like a challenger. Amanda Nunes can fight that championship style, and I think Amanda Nunes, if she is pressured into fighting that slow pace style, where she's mostly focused on boxing her opponents outside the pocket, outside of her range, then that's the most likely opportunity. That's where Felicia Spencer is most likely to go win this fight, through boxing and through 5 rounds. I don't think Spencer can defeat Amanda Nunes via KO, TKO, or submission victory. Once again, I can be completely wrong here. For all I know, Felicia Spencer could be knocking out Amanda Nunes within the span of 30 seconds. It could possibly happen then. I'm that confident that Felicia Spencer has the capabilities of doing so. But I say Amanda Nunes is going to follow Felicia Spencer. If Spencer can go survive the first minute and a half, and when I say survive, I mean she's avoiding, for the most part, the significant strikes, and she's handling herself in the 50 exchanges with Amanda Nunes, then this fight can go 5 rounds, and Spencer might win this fight out through either split decision or by majority decision. That's how I put it, though. I just don't see Spencer definitively knocking out or submitting Amanda Nunes, because Amanda Nunes has the complete game. She can grapple with you, she can do clinch boxing, she can go do dirty boxing, she can fight from outside the pocket, she can fight inside the pocket. Amanda Nunes has a complete game, more of a complete game than Felicia Spencer, but Amanda Nunes relies on this one specific aspect of her fight game, and it's the striking, and if Felicia Spencer can beat her in the striking game, then that means Felicia Spencer has a chance of defeating Amanda Nunes. So I say in the end here, Amanda Nunes is going to defeat Felicia Spencer, but do not count on Felicia. She can definitely do it, and I won't be surprised if Felicia Spencer all of a sudden throws out this wild leg kick or a right hook and does a flash knockout. It can definitely happen, and it'll be the biggest shocker in UFC history. So you're listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, coming back right after the short break here.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
And welcome back. Since Amanda Nunes will be main eventing the next upcoming major UFC event, that is UFC 250, this Saturday starting at 7 p.m. Pacific Time at the UFC Apex Facility Building in Las Vegas, well, I want you to get to know who is Amanda Nunes. So I found something very interesting here. I got Amanda Nunes trivia. 26 fascinating facts about the UFC Bantamweight champion. Dual champion now, featherweight division. Featherweight division is kind of meh, but still, she's still a double champion. Random fact here, she was born in 1988. Wow, she is still a youngling. Oh my goodness. So she was born in 1988, so she's still really young. Random fact number 2, Nunes grew up in a small town outside of Salvador, Bahia, Brazil. Number 3, she started training in karate at age of 4 and pursued training in boxing at the age of 16. Wow. Then she would have been a really great karate. She would have been a really good boxer then. Really is. Some people make fun of, the traditional martial arts like Taekwondo and karate. But one thing people do need to know is that Taekwondo and karate, they don't make you a great mixed martial arts fighter. But they do help you when you do make the transition. And it helps you develop your skills a lot more easier and a lot more better. It's a lot more better to... Okay, let's say this. So if there's 2 people, one of them, they're both 20 years old. One of them wants to get into they both want to get into boxing. One of them did karate at the age of 7, and the other one just didn't do any martial arts at all, and is just going straight towards mixed martial arts. The fact that person knew karate beforehand, before even doing mixed martial arts, helped them develop becoming a better fighter, and they got stuff like stances and distancing a lot more early on. So yeah, like karate, Taekwondo, all this stuff helps you out later as you go on. I can attest right now, Taekwondo helped me out as I learned boxing, because because I know it's strange that Taekwondo is mostly focused on kicks though, but when I did boxing, things were a lot more easier for me when it comes to doing drills, when it comes to movement, when it comes to positioning. It felt a lot more better. I am happy that I learned a martial art before I did boxing, because if I just went straight towards boxing, yikes, I would have been even way more bad. Random fact number 4, under the strict tutelage of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt Ryan Franco of Redding, California, she began to hone her grappling skills. Hey, I'm a California person, so if you want to see Amanda Nunes and want to train like her in her grappling ability, go to Redding, California. Random fact number 5, she attributes much of her success to the teaching of her master, Mr. Franco. Not James Franco, but it'll be cool. Random fact number 5 here, she first competed in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu after being invited to a dojo by her sister, who also trained in the sports. Random fact number 6, Nunes lived in New Jersey and trained at AMA Fight Club, but now lives in Miami and trains at MMA Masters. Besides, you don't live in the East Coast, man. East Coast is weird. And I got relatives who live in the East Coast, complete night and day, as it pertains to like the culture in the East Side versus the West Side. Random fact number 7 here, she has competed in the 135 and 145 pound weight division. You don't know that. Random fact number 8 here, Nunes made her mixed martial arts debut on March 8, 2008 at Prime MMA Championship 2. That is your Jeopardy answer there. She faced Anna Maria and was defeated by armbar submission in the first round. Not that. She lost her first fight in mixed martial arts. She could have gave up, and look where she is now, a millionaire. Random fact number 9 here, Nunes won 5 straight fights, all by form of knockout, and made her Strikeforce debut on January 7, 2011. And in that same card, there also was Woolley versus Safadine in Nashville, Tennessee. She defeated Canadian Julia Budd by knockout in just 14 seconds. Random fact number 10 here, Nunes was scheduled to fight Julie Kedzie at Strikeforce with Wolverine versus Fabricio Verdum at June 18, 2011 in Dallas, Texas. The bout, however, was cancelled after Nunes sustained a foot injury, and Amanda Nunes has a history of not going into any fight without going in 100%. For as much as we love to see, champions be like, just tough it out, be grit, have grit, just go through the pain. No, Nunes doesn't play like that. Random fact number 11, Amanda Nunes fought Alexis Davis on September 10, 2011 on the Strikeforce Grand Prix semifinals card. She lost the fight via TKO late in the second round. What? Amanda Nunes getting knocked out? Impossible. We can't imagine it. We can't imagine it today, but she was that fighter. She was a middle-of-the-road journeyman fighter early on in her career. Random fact number 12 here, Amanda Nunes signed to face Kat Zingano at Strikeforce, Melendez vs. Healy, on September 29, 2012. But the event was cancelled when Gilbert Melendez, who was set to defend his title against Pat Healy, sustained a knee injury in training that forced his withdrawal from the card. Random fact number 13 here, Amanda Nunes was scheduled to face Milan Duduvia at Invicta FC2, Baszler vs. McMahon, which is Shayna Baszler vs. Sarah McMahon, on July 28, 2012. And guess what? Now Shayna Baszler is now a pro wrestler, and Sarah McMahon is probably doing the best she is in her career. Random fact number 14 here, on January 4, 2013, Nunes returned to Invicta Fighting Championship to face Sarah D'Elio at Invicta FC4, which was headlined by Carla Esparza and Hyatt. Nunes lost the fight via unanimous decision. Random fact here, number 15, Nunes was scheduled to face Caitlin Young at Invicta FC5 on April 5, 2013. However, she sustained an arm injury and was forced to withdraw from the fight. Matt Nunes has a long history of just, one injury. You know what? I'm not doing it. I'm not dealing with it. And I was like, here's a just fact here. I'm not going to go by a number here because it just goes by every one of her fights. So I'm going to pick out the more interesting ones here. Amanda Nunes made her second UFC appearance when she faced Germaine de Randamie at UFC Fight Night 31 on November 6, 2013. She won the fight via TKO in the first round. And now, cut several years later, now Germaine de Randamie says that she should have won the second fight. I got on here, and we got, for her third fight with the promotion, Amanda Nunes was named the injury replacement for Shayna Baszler against Sarah Kaufman at the Ultimate Fighter Nations finale. However, Nunes later pulled out of the bout due to an injury, a dislocated thumb. So yeah, man, Nunes, she didn't even really won the Ultimate Fighter. Just go with that. She was part of the show, but she didn't do all that well. Well, because you didn't do all that well in the show, look at Nate Diaz. That doesn't mean you can't have a great career. So if you are part of it, always confused me about the Ultimate Fighter. It was like, what's the point of continuing on if you get eliminated? I never really got that. And it's because, well, if you continue to press forward, you get the right connections, and they know it's going to like you, and you might be booked for a future UFC fight. Amanda Nunes faced against Shayna Baszler on March 21, 2015 at UFC Fight Night. She won the fight via TKO in the first round. And it was around 2015 that I believe Shayna Baszler really started emphasizing her work towards the pro wrestling game. At this point, she was already participating in Japan. She's going around the States, participating in small local independent wrestling shows. So, I don't know, it's just weird that during the UFC in 2015, they had somebody in the roster who was simultaneously both a pro wrestler and a UFC fighter. And she came into the UFC with a lot of hype behind Shayna Baszler, one of the 4 horsewomen. Amanda Nunes faced Valentina Shevchenko on March 5, 2016 at UFC 196. She won the fight by unanimous decision. That would definitely be a dream fight now, because Valentina Shevchenko and Nunes are much more better fighters than who they were 4 years ago. And Valentina Shevchenko is the second most dominant women's champion right now in the UFC's women's divisions. Weili Zhang, I say she's... As of right now, Weili Zhang has the most stock in her just because of her performance against Joanna. But when I say that what's the pecking order of the top women's fighters, you would say Amanda Nunes, Valentina Shevchenko, and Weili Zhang. Now, even though that's the case, I still say Weili Zhang is probably my favorite women's champion right now in the UFC, off the basis that I feel kind of stilted over Amanda Nunes in her bout against Germaine Randamie. Valentina Shevchenko, she's been clearing everyone in her division. The same thing applies to Amanda Nunes. She's pretty much cleared everyone in the women's feather division, to the point that if you go to UFC.com, they show all the rankings. They show who are the top 10 heavyweights, top 10 middleweights, top 10 welterweights, and every division has about 10, 12 names, with the exception being the UFC women's featherweight belts. And so that's why I believe that it would be a really good thing for the featherweight division if Floyd Spencer were to go in. Because if Spencer were to defeat Amanda Nunes, she would keep the belt, she ain't going nowhere, and then Amanda Nunes would direct all her focus and time towards the bantamweight division. And so it'd be... This is good for everyone, with the exception of Amanda Nunes. But all the fighters in the featherweight division, they don't have to be worried about, this champion who will defend the belt maybe once every 2 years. All the fighters in the women's bantamweight divisions, they look at Amanda Nunes and be like, oh wow, she's actually beatable, and they're going to throw their name out there. I think there's more storylines, there's more narratives that can be thrown out there if Amanda Nunes were to lose her belt and she becomes exclusively a fighter for the women's bantamweight division. I think it'll make the featherweight division a lot more healthier. Well, that wraps it up for today's podcast. I just gotta say thank you. Thank you for listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps out. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts MMA podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.